You've never seen a regular season game with the stakes that you will see on Sunday. And that game is defined by an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator going at it again. Their story goes back further than you think. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, I want to make two main points before we go on to the Zoever under, where we'll look at some of the gambling lines and, of course, your bold predictions. But before I do that, I want to talk about two things. One, the history of Ben Johnson and Brian Flores, because I think that is the matchup we're all talking about, right? And maybe this one will ultimately be defined more by Aaron Glenn's defense and how well they can overcome injuries and how well the Vikings can move the ball against them and all that. But I think the marquee matchup here is Flores versus Ben Johnson. And then I want to talk a little bit about Ben Johnson's offense, because I honestly think people kind of have him all wrong. And I want to focus in on what really makes that offense strong and how Brian Flores' defense tries to attack these kinds of offenses and maybe why that hasn't worked in the past. So first things first, little history lesson. And this is going to be a lot of talk about the Miami Dolphins, but trust me. So if you remember back to 2012, I believe there was a Hard Knocks season in 2014 as well, on the Joe Philbin Miami Dolphins. This is Joe Philbin. In fact, this entire story kind of starts because Aaron Rodgers won MVP in 2011. It starts in the NFC North. But Joe Philbin was his offensive coordinator, and that season got him a head coaching job in Miami in 2012. As part of that staff, he hired Ben Johnson as an offensive assistant. He would ultimately become assistant quarterbacks coach for a few years, and his tight ends coach was none other than Dan Campbell. So in 2015, when those Miami Dolphins took a 41-14 shellacking at home against Buffalo, and then lost again the next week against the Jets, two multiple score, completely uncompetitive losses to divisional opponents at home, yeah, that'll get you fired. And Joe Philbin was fired, especially with the bye week coming. So he was fired by week 5 that year. And who took over for the rest of that season? You might remember, tight ends coach Dan Campbell and former tight end Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell led the Dolphins to roughly 500. He was 5-7, better than the 1-3 pathetic start that they were on. But the Dolphins didn't ultimately stick with him. Meanwhile, Ben Johnson moved to tight ends coach to replace Dan Campbell when he took over as the head coach, took over his tight end coach duties. And I have to imagine that in that moment, there was a lot of interaction between the two. As Dan Campbell, passed off that job, tell him all the things. Here's what we do. Here's the drills we do. Here's what you got to know about this guy, that guy. And whatever it is, this is kind of where these two guys, I believe, first got to know each other. So after this, Dan Campbell did a pretty admirable job. And I remember thinking, and I remember watching all the talking heads kind of say this, that like, hey, he kind of earned the right to have that job, no? But no, the Miami Dolphins went with the hot offensive coordinator of the year, a guy by the name of Adam Gase. He was absolutely the hottest name on the press that year. He was coming off of winning the Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos just 2 years prior. He coordinated a record-setting offense. I mean, these were the Peyton Manning, really good Broncos, 2012, 2013, 2014. And, he got old, but, then they looked okay with Brock Osweiler too. So Adam Gase had all this hype, and he ends up getting the job over Dan Campbell. And they will clean out a lot of the staff, but not Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson stays in Miami, survives that coaching switch, moves to receivers, and stays in that role for the entirety of the Adam Gase tenure. But the Gase thing flamed out in 2018 and he was fired. And in 2019, they decided to go to the other side, still go get the hot coordinator, but this time the defensive guy that just came off of the Super Bowl win. And that was Brian Flores. Brian Flores did not keep Ben Johnson. A lot of people want to make something out of this. I would say that Adam Gase keeping him is the remarkable thing, not the new guy trying to hire all his own guys. And I would be surprised if Ben Johnson held any ill will toward that, but maybe he felt like he deserved to stay because he had survived one coaching turnover. Why not give me a chance to survive another one? Whatever it was, Brian Flores brought in his own guys for his time in Miami, and the rest of his story you're probably more familiar with. So in 2021, when the Lions hired Dan Campbell to be their head coach, he already has his old tight ends coach replacement in the building, in Ben Johnson, who, after he was ousted in 2019, went to go coach for the Matt Patricia Lions. So we got a couple of former Patriots DCs and these guys that all these people that were kind of ships passing in the night for a while that have now come to clash in this very palpable way. So now this will be the fourth matchup of Ben Johnson and Brian Flores as Vikings DC and Lions OC, and Ben Johnson has won all three of those first matchups, and has moved the ball very well on Brian Flores' defense. Now, those games were late in the year last year. Flores' defense in December and January last year was completely a different problem, right? Like totally figured out, and things changed in the offseason that helped to paper over those issues. And, I didn't go into the week 7 game expecting the same things to happen. And I don't think that it will happen again. But in that week 7 game, Ben Johnson still found a way to move the ball for 4 straight sustained touchdown drives, which ended up being all the scoring the Lions needed. They had one other field goal that entire game. They end up winning. And that came right at the end. So that means Ben Johnson has given Brian Flores trouble. I think it's pretty fair to say that. So the question is, why? And to be as succinct about this as possible, Ben Johnson's offense, I think people get a little too excited about all the razzle-dazzle, right? The hook and ladders and the throwing to O-linemen and he faked a fumble. All of these are cute little wrinkles and touches, but they do not an offense make. They are window dressing. They are bells and whistles. What is the actual steak made out of, right? I don't care as much about the sizzle as much as I care about the steak. The steak in Detroit is built, I would say, out of diversity. Especially in the run, the fact that, and this is a marvel to the position coaching and everything that the Lions have done, I think this is just a well-coached team because they have installed a lot of different stuff. They do a lot of gap, a lot of zone, a lot of different, it's a very complex run game without losing complexity in the pass game. That means you did a really good job of teaching guys stuff and teaching guys stuff quickly, and you get to now enjoy the dividends of a way deeper play sheet, a really deep well, as Ben Johnson has put it. So when you're dealing with an offense that has a deep play sheet, the Brian Flores philosophy about that is, well, let's take a lot of it away from them. You think about what Brian Flores would do, let's say, against a Kevin O'Connell style offense that likes to drop deep and likes to run a lot of long routes. Well, if you're going to send guys at him all the time and force those things to compress, force that time to compress, suddenly you get pages and pages and pages of his playbook that he doesn't have access to unless he wants his quarterback running around a lot. I would say that was about the plan that Arizona took into their game against us, and it worked very well for most of that game. So that's the kind of thing that Brian Flores would want to do, is how do I take your really diverse thing where you've got access to all these different ideas and cut you off from some of your categories, whatever categories those are. I want to make it so that you don't have access to this kind of game. I want to make you, less multidimensional. And I think in all 3 of the last games, for one reason or another, the Vikings have failed to do that. The Lions have managed, we're going to send a bunch of guys at you. We're going to blitz you a lot and make you get the ball out quickly. Then you shouldn't be able to push the ball downfield anyways. But the Lions have pushed the ball downfield anyways. Or maybe we're going to make things really, really confusing. So you can't use, pre-snap stuff. You can't do stuff that relies too much on the pre-snap read. But the Lions have still kind of managed to do those manufactured touches and to execute those things and make them work. This segment does not have a proposed solution. I don't think I'm smart enough to even touch that. I have no idea. But that is what I think the problem that Brian Flores is dealing with. I think the nature of it is he is trying to reduce the diversity of the Detroit Lions offense. This is his fourth chance to do it. He hasn't done it well enough the first 3 times. We'll see. But boy, Vegas sure doesn't think that's going to happen. We'll talk more about that on the Zoever Under. That is coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by PrizePicks, the best place to play daily fantasy football. It is playoff time, and if you're anything like me, even Vikings playoff games, I'm probably going to have a PrizePicks lineup for every single game. All you got to do is pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players, and if you're doing the same game, you got to have one person from each team. You just can't have only players from a single team. You got to mix in something else. And then whether they'll do better or worse than their PrizePicks projection, just pick more or less than, and you get a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and if you win, PrizePicks will cash you out. For me, it takes them 15 minutes when picks hit for them to pay it out. Here's also a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. This episode is also brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy. If you've been thinking about getting into therapy, but maybe it just doesn't work with your work schedule, or it's just really hard to find appointments that can work for you, or you don't want to go all the way into an office, BetterHelp is kind of made for that. It is online therapy that can be done either by video chat or even by text from the comfort of your own home. And they'll hook you up with a therapy that they think is right for you. If you don't like that person, you can switch at any time for no additional cost. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Moving on with today's episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, it's time to look at some of those gambling lines and see just what it is that America thinks about this game. It's time for the Zoever Under. Boy, people think a lot of points are going to be scored in this one. This is the highest over-under the Vikings have seen in a game so far by far. 56.5 is where it stands on FanDuel right now, which is where you will find all of the lines we are using today on the Zoever Under. The Zoever Under is not a segment where I go over what bets I like or what I think is going to happen or try to, predict how things are going to play out, but rather look at the lines and try to get a sense for what people think will happen in this game. And the Lions are favored in this one by 2.5 points, and at least on FanDuel, the public is hammering the Lions. They're minus 120. The Vikings are minus 102. On FanDuel, you usually won't see a straight spread go any shorter than 120 before FanDuel just changes that spread. They might change it to 3, and I think they might be on the cusp of doing that. But of course, going from 2.5 to 3, going over that hook point is going to take quite a bit of influence for FanDuel to do it. So you're kind of somewhere in there between 2.5 and 3 points for the Lions. That's what the public thinks will happen, and the over-under is at 56.5 with more of the money on the under. So that implies something like a 30-27 Lions victory. That's what the public is predicting. And boy, that is a high scoring game that the public thinks. But hey, the last one was 31-29, not too far off of that. So the public is expecting quite a lot of points to be scored, and that means just about every one of these props is going to be off the charts. Sam Darnold's over-under is at 283.5 as of this recording. Jared Goff's is at 271.5. I think it's very interesting that Darnold's is higher, even though the Lions offense, I think, has quite a bit more of a reputation than the Vikings offense. And I think that it's fair for them too, but that is, I think, telling you something about what the public thinks about the Lions defense. It's banged up. It's been really poor. In the last month, the Lions have had the worst EPA per play or EPA per drop back defense in the league, worse than everybody else it's been the Lions. They have been given, and now some of that strength of opponent, right? The Bills come into town. Not everybody played the Bills in that time. And when you shrink the sample sizes to like just the last 3 or 4 games, you open yourself up to that stuff. But like, that's kind of what we're working with here. I always like, of course, to look at the touchdown scorers and see kind of what we're working with. And, we've had games where nobody has shorter odds than 50-50, right? Nobody has like that blessing of the books to say like, well, we do think this guy's. There are 5 players in this one that are have minus odds. Jahmyr Gibbs minus 290 anytime touchdown score. That is the book basically saying we will set our watches by a Jahmyr Gibbs touchdown at some point in this game. Aaron Jones and Cam Akers both minus 140. Those two have been dead even with each other in odds for the last few weeks. Mainly this is FanDuel's way, I think, of saying we don't know how much Aaron Jones is going to play. However, I think that we get to be more certain than they get to be. Aaron Jones has said he's playing. It's a quad contusion. It's a small thing, and he's been a full participant. I should also mention elsewhere in injury news, Alex Anzalone was upgraded to full participation on Thursday, so that starts to look more optimistic toward him playing. But back to touchdown scorers, both Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, both at minus 120. And then you get Jordan Addison at plus 110, Jamison Williams at plus 130, TJ Hawkinson at plus 165. Like, those guys aren't exactly long shots either. So they are expecting a lot of touchdowns. Passing touchdowns over 1.5 for both quarterbacks, minus 210 for Goff, minus 205 for Sam Darnold. They're expecting 3. Maybe. And we can look at the alt line for 3, plus 178 and plus 188 for 3 touchdowns. For 3 touchdowns, less than 3-1. So they are saying somewhere between 2 and 3 touchdowns is like the expectation for both Sam Darnold and Jared Goff. You want to go to the receiving props. Justin Jefferson's line is at 91.5. Jordan Addison's line is at 64.5. TJ Hawkinson's hasn't gone up that much. It's at 46.5. On the other side, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 75.5. Jamison Williams, 58.5. Sam Laporta, 51.5. These are high lines. This is a game that people expect a lot of scoring to happen in, which is why I kind of wanted to focus this whole thing on the Ben Johnson, Brian Flores matchup. We spent a lot of time yesterday on the crossover with Matt Derry talking about the other side of the ball. Who's hurt on the Lions? How are they going to stop Justin Jefferson? Those kinds of questions. How are they going to get pressure on Sam Darnold? Those are the questions, right? But this game, the last 3 times, has still featured Brian Flores getting worked. And I'm not going to blame him too much for the ones last year. There were major schematic holes that this was still a beta test thing, and they had been figured out by the end of the year, and it's fine. I don't think the Lions do that if they catch him week 6 of 2023 instead of week 16 and 18. Last time they met as well, you also have to remember Blake Cashman was out. That had a major impact on that game. It's not going to be the case. The Vikings are healthier and the Lions very much aren't. So we will see if the Lions offense moves quite as much as they do. But I will say, from my familiarity with Lions props, these are about standard. I think these are pretty normal numbers for all of these guys, that you'll find them somewhere in this range every week, kind of no matter who they're playing. But for the Vikings, these lines are higher than we have been used to from watching them all year on this segment. So the world still is favoring the Lions to win, giving them home field advantage. They've been the darling all year. You kind of expected that. But they are expecting the Vikings, at least offensively, to play better than they have played in the past. This is supposed to be a good one for the Vikings offense, and it's supposed to be a normal one for the Lions offense, which puts you at 56.5 points scored. Pretty intense stuff. But the other part of I guess I should go over the rushing props too before I get there. There aren't any, because for Aaron Jones, anytime the running back's on the injury report, FanDuel pulls them. But for Jahmyr Gibbs, 87.5 is the line if you're interested in that, with 18.5 as the rushing attempts number. And I always like to look at the game specials to see if there's anything super interesting, like Jared Goff and Sam Darnold to record 25 plus passing yards in each quarter is plus 120. I'm personally not a fan of those particular lines because It's just too easy to get like weirdly, shut out of a quarter because there was like one defensive touchdown or something like that, and then like two, long drives. And then suddenly you don't, something that was like 2 run plays and 1 pass play and you punt. And then that's all you touch the ball for in that quarter because it's just such an arbitrary cutoff. But something there that's, interesting. Also plus 140 each team to score a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. That's also an interesting and a fun one. Easy to imagine, but also very easy to imagine the world where they scored 3 touchdowns and it was all passing touchdowns this time. Like kind of tough for the Vikings. But the other part of this segment is to have my pet rabbits pick. Now, for those who haven't been with us all year long, the rabbits they haven't picked every game. I've been out of town sometimes and stuff. So and there were pushes, which I just am not counting. So right now, Zoe, the girl rabbit, tan one, is 9-4. Zii, the gray one, is 7-6. They're both doing well. Zoe has fallen back to earth a little bit after an absolutely lights out start. I think she started like 8-1, and she's fallen back to earth a little bit, but she is still very much above 500. And Zii is at 7-6, trying to catch her. So let's see what they picked. Unfortunately for the randomness of this segment, they have definitely figured out what it sounds like when I'm putting veggies on the plate, and they know exactly to like wait and come out for that. So they're going to come out really fast, and they're going to both go straight for Minnesota plus 2.5. Yes, both rabbits agree. They're both picking the Vikings. Everyone is ride or die with Sam Darnold this week, including myself in the Minnesota football betting party, Minnesota football party betting contest. Please pray for me that Sam Darnold gets 275 plus. And an interesting trend, when the rabbits agree, they have not been wrong yet this year. They'll agree, I would say, a little less than half the time. Most of the time, one of them boxes the other out. So one takes the path of least resistance and takes the cilantro that isn't taken yet. But if they agree, they have not yet been wrong this year. And of course, Zostradamus's endorsement is always a good sign. So if you are into the magics of the rabbits, the news is good. The planets are aligning properly. Let's get to something even less serious than that was, which is your bold predictions. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And all of the lines we just went over can, of course, be found at FanDuel. If you want to get in on any of that kind of stuff, you can right now get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So you can go take some ridiculous alt line, like there will be 19.5 points scored in this super high over-under game, and you can get it at minus 600 bajillion. And if you win, you still get $250 in bonus bets just for putting $5 on that and getting $5.01 back or whatever. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W, whether you are finding those prop bets, betting on just the straight up spreads or money lines or over unders, or betting live, where FanDuel has all kinds of tools to help you make a live bet in the middle. If the Vikings are leading at halftime and you're thinking maybe a collapse is coming, you can make that bet live with live stats and play-by-play to help you make the most informed decision. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Here she is, the celebrity herself, Zostradamus. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you're missing out on a rabbit who is currently messing with the mic. Brought her here for the bold predictions for as long as she will not freak out. So it's time for the bold predictions. These are bold predictions as given by you. Here's the deal. Last week, I was not doing great. I did not write them down. I said a few. I don't know if they happened. I'm pretty sure I would have heard about it, so I'm going to go with no. If I am wrong and something happened, I will shout it out next time I get a chance to. But let's just go directly into the bold predictions for Week 18 against Detroit. And the first one comes from Ryan L., who says, through 4 games in the city of Detroit, Justin Jefferson averages a staggering 182.5 receiving yards per game, but just 0.5 touchdowns per game. This game will increase his yards per game and decrease his touchdowns per game. So Justin Jefferson, over 183 or over 182.5, but not scoring a touchdown. That is pretty bold. And to be honest, I think this rabbit is done and has hit her over. I didn't expect her to last even this long. There's an incentive to go watch the video version, everybody. Okay, next one comes from Shane McHugh, who says, if there is a Gink 6 against the Lions, I will get a Minnesota Vikings tattoo on my butt. So Gink 6 against the Lions, that's the bold prediction, but I am holding you to that, Shane. And I know that you're a listener. So even though this was not submitted in the bold predictions, but somebody in Shane's replies tagged me in it, so I'm counting it. And yep, you're beholden now, buddy. Smart guy Ryan says, could you imagine 3 of them? Come on. And after getting the Pro Bowl and all the crazy work that is put into it with Van Ginkel, who truly coming into this year was never seen as a Pro Bowl quality player. He was a role player. He was signed, a nice 2-year deal. We all thought it was responsible. I looked at his tape. I was like, oh yeah, I kind of like what he does. But nobody was like, this guy is a superstar in the making. But I don't know, you Gink 6 it twice and that'll do it. So let's get a third one, baby. That's the kind of thing. We have talked all week about like how important turnovers are in this game. Kevin O'Connell has talked about it. Whoever wins a turnover battle wins the game most of the time anyways, but it does feel especially true in this one. That does figure to be a shootout. And if it is a shootout, then the turnover battle is kind of, I think, a little extra weighty because you expect to score so often that a turnover, just in the fact that it ends a drive and gives the other team field position so that theirs isn't going to end, is just feels a little bit extra backbreaking. Not as much as it is in like a 6-3 game where that might be the only reason the other team gets points, but it still feels like kind of extra backbreaking in one of these like extreme weird games. Sam Root says Jefferson enters week 18 with 1,479 yards, 133 behind Jamar Chase. He'll get at least 258 to pass Anthony Carter for third in Vikings history and spoil his college teammates' Triple Crown campaign. So we need to see, that's got to be close to a Vikings franchise record single game anyways. So we got to see that, but we also need to see Jamar Chase not get himself more than that. Like he also needs to end the week past Jamar Chase, which Chase's game will be over by then anyway, so we'll know exactly what kind of yardage that means. Smart guy Ryan says that the Vikings haven't beat the Lions since 2022 week 3. In this game, they will avenge the previous losses, winning by the point differential in the games played since, which is 29. So I'll say 29, or I'll say over 28.5. How about that? Vikings minus 28.5 is the prop bet that you're making. And I believe we can actually look at that on FanDuel, because they have all of their like alt lines. And I think I don't know if it goes that high. Not quite. Minus 23.5 is plus 2,000. So minus 28.5, a little, it's off of the FanDuel charts. Surely that's bold enough. Tim Pietz says a Detroit offensive lineman will score the game-winning touchdown. I usually don't go for these that like kind of tell a story of a trick play. A lot of people say, oh, this thing happens and then someone runs out on the field and blah, blah, blah. Usually I don't go for those, but so many of you wanted to make a bold prediction somehow about the Vikings or the Lions doing something throwing to an O-lineman. Either an O-lineman throws a pick or 2 different O-linemen catch a pass or something crazy like that. This was, I think, my favorite one, and the one that felt the most like one of the things I'm going for with these bold predictions is I want it to be like, if it happens, it's the story of the game, right? Like the one Pete Bursich hit a few weeks ago, Jordan Addison getting 3 touchdowns. Like that was kind of like, if not the 1A, the 1B story of that game against the Falcons. And I feel like if a Detroit offense, Penei Sewell catches the game-winning touchdown against the Vikings, like big man touchdown, thick six stuff is going to be everywhere. Like that is going to be what we talk about. And of course, Brian Flores will be on the podium answering questions about how he let a freaking tackle get by his defense in the goal line. Like that does feel like it would be the story. Shadow says a whole bunch of things about how the Vikings the Lions have not beaten the Vikings 4 times in a row since the Vikings were an expansion team, since 1961 to 63. That was their largest lead ever. It was 5 games long. The Vikings, on the other hand, have had a 13-game win streak over the Lions in the past. So he says for this upcoming game, The Vikings' largest lead will be by 13 points, and the largest lead of the game, and the Lions' largest lead will be by 5 points, and parlaying that with the Lions ending their current win streak, aka parlaying it with the Vikings money line. So I'll give you over-unders here. So the Vikings' largest lead of the game will be by 13 or more points, and the Lions' largest lead of the game will be by 5 or fewer. That doesn't feel bold enough, does it? Because that could be if the Vikings do just get out to like a sensible, 17-point lead and the game just kind of cruises from there, then that hits, and that doesn't feel like ending streaks and this crazy stuff is bold enough. So I will not make it over-unders. I will hold you to your exactlies, which is what Shadow said. Exactly 13 points and exactly 5 points. So now it's time for me to get involved here. Now I am giving myself until the end of the Vikings season. So I will count whatever playoffs we get here in this, but I'm giving myself a chance to get out of a punishment that I currently owe you all for a bold prediction that you all hit week 1. And if I can get a bold prediction of my own, I get out of it. I'm working with the Duck. The Duck submitted one that said that every offensive Pro Bowler would score. I like that one. It's those players are Justin Jefferson, Sam Darnold, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jared Goff, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And for this, I will count passing touchdowns as touchdowns for Darnold and Goff. So if Goff throws one to St. Brown, Darnold throws one to Jefferson, and then Gibbs gets it, we're good to go. Parlaying all that would be pretty high odds, but it didn't feel quite bold enough for me to be able to look in the mirror and say that if I joined you on that one and it hit, now I don't have to do the eggs thing. I'm going to add one. I need one more Pro Bowler to score. So let's make it an even thing. With passing touchdowns counting for the quarterbacks, 6 Pro Bowlers will score in this game. That means that guys like Van Ginkel need to score, Grenard need to score, Andrew DePaola could technically get in there on some kind of wacky, unholy trick play. Penei Sewell could get in there, Frank Ragnow, Brian Branch, and Jack Fox. He said every offensive. I think that meant he included the offensive linemen too. But I will say 6 Pro Bowlers score. And I think that will be plenty bold. And I will join in with the Duck on that. Joining forces with the forces of evil. You have never seen a regular season game like this. That means this. You have never seen, if you are under the age of 55, if you were 55, you would have been 3 years old the last time the Vikings won 9 games in a row. That was 1973. So if you're under the age of 55, you've never seen a season like this. Even 98, they didn't do 9 in a row. You've never gone into a Vikings game 9 times and come out rewarded for your faith 9 times in a row. So that feeling of joy that you have right now with the Vikings, that uninterrupted, man, every single Sunday has been fun, you've never had it before, unless you're over the age of 55, which I know a lot of my listeners are. Please shout yourselves out. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being everydayers. And we've never seen a regular season game between two 14-win teams. And in fact, we've only seen that in the playoffs 5 times, and most of them are Super Bowls. So there's never been something like this. Enjoy the ride. We'll all be anxious messes. But the Vikings are participating in something historic right now, and whether they win or lose will not define their season. They still get to go play playoff games, and we'll define the season by that. But if they win and they get that 1 seed, and we get to just live in that for a week, boy, that sounds real nice. Here's to hoping for that. But we're already in a place of history, and the 2024 Vikings are going to go down in legend one way or another. Ain't no way around that. So now we're just here to find out exactly what that legend is. I'll talk to you all on the other side of this. And as always, Skull.